In 1986, when I first learned about NCIS, or NIS at the time, Naval Investigative Service, I was in a graduate level class at the University of Alabama, and I met an individual. Well, actually, I knew her already. Her name was Diane Miller. She would subsequently become a special agent with NIS in Charleston, South Carolina. Diane and I were good friends and had worked together in retail loss prevention. But what I remember about that conversation was she'd just been interviewed by a little organization called Naval Investigative Service, NIS. And I was like, I was on my senior year in college, and I'd already worked a job as an intern police officer at the university police. So I was really curious about what was NIS. The thing that we talked about the job, and she, told me everything about NIS. But the only thing that stuck out to me was they catch spies. I thought that was cool. I wanted to be a part of an organization because I can tell you that I was a staunch anti-communist. Even in those days, I believed it was a patriotic duty to serve your country in any way you could. I had not had that opportunity yet. So I was looking for that. I'd taken a test as to be a naval officer. Didn't do well on it. I can assure you I didn't do very well on it all because I think I'd had a few too many drinks the night before, partied a little bit too hard. In the morning when Lieutenant Mike White, who was a former teammate of mine, contacted me and said, "Hey, when you take this test and come to the Navy like I'm doing," didn't do well on that at all. And I still apologize to Mike White every time I see him, when I do see him. Mike went on to be a Navy SEAL and a fantastic operator. Anyway, I'd eventually joined Naval Investigative Service in 1989. And my first years were beyond being an afloat agent on the USS Kitty Hawk. I was primarily a narcotics agent for the most part. I mean, I'd done other cases as well, but I started off in property crimes because they wanted to, since I was like the least experienced guy they had in the office, they did property crimes. But anyway, I eventually started doing narcotics cases, and that was really my wheelhouse as far as cases. So the thing that I brought forth from that, or, learned from that experience, was that narcotics sources are very much like sources who are double agents, who are in the counterintelligence arena, who are, assets for operations, doing counterintelligence operations. So I learned a lot from working those sources and working the sources that I'd eventually work in Iraq, who were primarily the criminal sources or very patriotic Iraqis that just wanted a better life. Skip ahead, and in 9/11, I was in Turkey. And I was conducting counterintelligence operations there with the Office of Special Investigations and with the Air Force, Det 521. And when the towers fell, I was sitting in Turkey and began basically supporting Navy visits to Turkey to resupply, to refuel, in order for them to move on to the Persian Gulf, where they would began planning the operations for the Iraq War. In 2005, I got the opportunity through the Contingency Response Field Office to deploy to Iraq and conduct counterintelligence operations in Baghdad at the Strategic Counterintelligence Directorate. Now, you won't find much information about the SCID, the Strategic Counterintelligence Directorate, on the internet. There's a few things. There's a book called Intelligence Wars, a very fine book that was written about the early days of the SCID and kind of the operations and how they conducted operations. But for the most part, there just isn't much to talk about with the SCID because we operated in the shadows. We weren't raising attention to ourselves, and the work that we did was passed on to the people who would conduct the operations that would kill terrorists. And that is what I'm probably most proud about in my career, was working those operations first in 2006 and then leading a team, the Bravo team, in 2007 with our guest today, Dave Pounder, where we conducted operations to defeat insurgency and to conduct counterintelligence to save lives. In other words, we would pass on our information to people that it'd be vital for them to conduct their operations and operate safely in Baghdad and other parts of Iraq. Dave and I had a great tour there. We had great leadership with John Dixon, with John Wagner, and also Tom Cox, who were kind of our three upper tier leaders. Dave and I were team chiefs for approximately 10 men and women teams that were made up of Air Force, OSI, Army counterintelligence, and Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents. They did phenomenal work. And that can't be minimized whatsoever. It was the best work that I've ever been involved in with this fine organization. So on today's show, I have Dave Pounder, and he's going to talk about, we're both going to discuss the SCID and the operations we did there. Not too much detail, but we will talk about some of the things we did. And the one thing that will stick out to both of us was the patriotic Iraqis. Now, we did criminal sources too, and that's when I said that working narcotic sources in 2006 really helped out, because most of the people that we were working at that time were former criminals. But we also worked with Iraqis who were extremely patriotic, never accepted money, except for, expenses that we'd help them deal with, and would provide us with valuable intelligence and information that would save lives, save American lives, because all they wanted was to live in a country in peace. So I hope you will enjoy today's episode of NCIS Reports from the Field with former Army Major Dave Pounder and my discussion on our time at the SCID. I want to welcome everybody to NCIS Reports from the Field. Today, a really cool discussion with a good friend of mine from our days in Iraq. And Dave, you retired as a major or a lieutenant colonel?
No, I did not. I never actually retired. I left the Army.
Oh, okay.
So I had just gotten promoted when I got to Iraq to a major. So I left as a major then at that point. So
okay, very good. So yeah, I thought you were a major. The last time I saw you at Fort Meade, you were and when you were working with what they used to call INSCOM or 902nd, yep. But it's not the 902nd anymore. Now it's U.S. Army Counterintelligence, right?
Yeah, the Army Counterintelligence Command, which is a great step for them, because for so long, and again, the 902nd was a great organization commanded by a full bird colonel, but they really needed, like, as I'm sure we'll talk around that today, is like the counterintelligence mission is so important. You really need a general officer, or for the Navy, you need a flag, like an admiral, to do that kind of stuff, because it's like, if you don't have that seat at the table and you're just a colonel, not to say that a colonel's a low rank or anything, but if you're just a colonel, it doesn't quite give you the influence that you need when you're dealing with like the SIGINT guys and the imagery guys and all the other types of intelligence out there. You kind of need to come with your collars, the appropriate rank on that collar. So
yeah, that does help. I mean, I remember when we had a one-star admiral in charge of NIS back in the day. We had our issues with, everybody that was above the 1-star. But I do want to talk about is the successful operations when conducted in a joint environment. And this was 2004, 2005, 2006 at the Strategic Counterintelligence Directorate in Baghdad, Iraq. We also had an office in Erbil and Basra. And we had some of the most successful counterintelligence operations. The way it was structured was we had two teams in Baghdad, and there were a team in Erbil and Basra. But I do remember in our team, Dave here was head of the A team. He was the George Papard of the A team, guys, and I had the B team. So we just were doing the best we could to stay close with Dave's team. Dave was a fantastic operator, and I had the best time working with Dave during those days. So learned a lot from Dave because he was so experienced in the counterintelligence arena, and he was just a delight to sit down and kind of work through problems that we had while working in Baghdad, because we were working in the green zone, but we had all kinds of stuff that was going on outside the green zone and lots of challenges. But I think in the end, when we look back on those days, so many successes, it was the best time of my career.
Yeah, I'll echo that too. I mean, I spent like more than a day in the army as well, and as I go back and reflect on that my career, and as I've been in the corporate world now for 10 years, but as I reflect back on it, my first memory, almost the first thing I always go back to is that time in Iraq, just because it was such a dynamic environment. It was such an important mission, and it was great people. Like I kept the log of all the people that I worked with there, and just whether it be like before you came, Lee, there was Jim Crandall,
Yep,
another
Jim
great
Crandall, great guy.
NCIS,
Yep.
another great NCIS guy. Even though he was a Clemson fan, I forgive him for that. Um, but there's a lot of great people from Navy, Air Force, and our like the joint leadership. It was just a fabulous working environment. And yeah, so definitely I agree with you. It's one of my first memories I go back to for sure.
Yeah, I remember first time I ever worked for an Army leader like John Dixon was was the most fantastic counterintelligence guy I think I've ever worked for, and that includes a lot of people like that I've worked with at NCIS. But John Dixon, man, what a phenomenal asset to the
Mm.
Army that he was, and what a phenomenal leader he was there. I remember, he's kind of guy you walk into his office, throw some ideas at it, and he would like, yeah, let's run with that. But have you thought about this? And it was just that kind of guy that he would come down in your office and sit down on the couch, and you're trying to manage all the spot reports and the IRs and all this stuff. And he's the kind of guy that come down and say, okay, how do we operationalize on this? How do we work? I mean, he was just a fantastic guy to work with.
Yeah, it's like it's those, and John was an amazing leader. I definitely second that. And it's too, he was in the army when he got there, and then he ultimately moved up to like the DoD level,
Mhm.
just because at such a young age, because
Yeah.
it's hard to reflect back to those days. You're like, oh, I was, in my mid 30s or whatever, and all, you're doing that kind of work, but then he had a huge career after he left there. But I definitely think like there was so much opportunity there to cut your teeth on things that like the bureaucracy was cut, like
Yeah.
the red tape wasn't there. And they routinely say like, and again, war is awful, war is terrible. I think let's just have that as a baseline. I don't want anybody coming after me and say you're a warmonger and all this other stuff. War sucks, but it is also in terms of like innovation and getting this stuff done,
Mhm.
there's no better time to do it because you need to deliver immediate results. You can't wait 3 to 6 months or a year for product development and all that other stuff. And so the same thing with like operationalizing our work. We would get stuff, and without having to go through 30 layers of bureaucracy to get something approved, John was able to take it directly to the J2 or the CJ2 and get that approved on the spot. And then within a day, we're operationalizing something like a really high stakes mission. And to have that ability is just like second to none. It's the environment. And but again, going back to your point there, you need to have great leaders and great teammates to work with. If you don't have that, if you can't foster that environment, then it really can make your miserable experience. I know when I came in, the person I replaced as the team leader for a team, and again has nothing to do with how good I am. I'm actually low less than not as effective as Lee is. He's selling himself short here, but I would say the person I came in, she was beat down. Like she was. This was a miserable experience for her because the leadership environment was really a struggle, and they just didn't know how to get it done. But then my team came in. We had a fresh set of Navy guys who came in as well, and Air Force. It was a full cycle reload, and then when you came in as well, and then John Dixon came in, and Jim Wagner too. Like
Yeah.
we had a whole new set of leadership that came in there that just like energized the place. and we just got things done. And that was what made that experience so rewarding for me. And frankly, as I know we'll talk to you a little bit, I mean, we got success, right? We had it was during the height of the surge. We had some of the best success
Mhm.
that I think anybody else had before or anybody had after us.
Yep, absolutely. I think it was probably the most successful because I rotated. My first tour at SCID was a year before, as one of the agents working on the B team, and it was we had Chuck Howard, who was our leader at that time, was focused on strategic stuff.
Mhm.
We were doing a lot of high level source work that was just phenomenal in identifying um, some of the routes that some of the countries that were assisting with trying to with destructuralizing the Iraqi government. We're trying to work against in the behind the scenes behind the Iraqi government, some of their stuff and how they were bringing weapons in to kill our soldiers. And that was an amazing experience. But when I got there during our time, it was a time where just things clicked, and we had
Mhm.
so many successful operations working with guys like Army Rangers, or the kind of the executors of the missions, because the intelligence would come in, our guys would gather the information, get the intelligence, and then we'd kind of run through the J2 with Mr. Dixon, and it was just amazing to see kind of the results of the work that our guys were doing. It was just amazing.
Yeah, it really was, and I tell you that's the other thing is like you talked about our coordination with the operational elements, whether it be the Rangers, the Special Forces, the Green Berets, or just the tactical units who were in it day in and day out. Like our job really, like obviously we wanted to stabilize Iraq, we wanted to get it to be a full-fledging country and everything, but we also had to protect our troops, and they, that was such a period of time where everything was blowing up and we had a lot of really bad, violence on, you know, country on country violence, or I guess Iraqi on Iraqi violence. You had all those militia groups that were out there, whether that be Jaish al-Mahdi or even like the beginning of Al Qaeda in Iraq and all those other groups. It was a tough environment. A lot of people were on edge, and I thought we brought a big force multiplier to that group by giving them critical information through our source networks and developments there. And then, I would just remember sometimes being on the call with some of those tactical units as they were in the fight and just giving them what our guys were telling, and I think it's just really important. And that's what made it so rewarding, I think.
Well, it's funny because I remember, and you have to talk about some of the Iraqi assets that we were working with. People don't understand when they think about this, but we had some brave Iraqis that were willing to
Yeah.
risk all to help us in our mission sets, and it was phenomenal what those guys did. I mean, I can always refer back to Joel Woods on my team and
Yeah,
how
totally.
I think he had recruited a guy who was the former Pepsi Cola, distributor for Baghdad, who had ties to everyone. And Joel got these guys all together and brought them down to the peace tables. It was
Yeah.
just amazing. Joel was a great operator. He was Air Force OSI, and like we talked about our teams. I mean, I had three good Army guys. I think Lisa Bolden Felchey, who came back a year later. We had Kurt Zimpel and Joe
Yep.
Sheridan. And of course, we had in the Navy side, I had Ivan Acosta and another guy. I can't remember his name. It's funny. I can remember the people in the OSI and Army CI, but I can't remember
Yeah. Yeah.
people's names. So, but we both had great teams. And I think that was the key to success, was just the fact that, these assets that were risking it all because my first tour with the SCID, we had some guys that didn't make it,
Yeah.
that were killed trying to help us out. And I had one guy, literally his car was blown up on the day he was trying to come to meet us, and he met us and his car was burning in a car garage, just outside the green zone. So it was a tough time to be there. As you said, it was a high operational time for sure for all of us, and just the amazing work that not only that our guys did, but I remember some of the Army units that were doing out there on the streets, gathering information and providing it to us as well, kind of the part of that network.
Yeah, I mean that's a huge point you're making there. I mean, in order for us to be successful, we had to have people we could trust and vet and make sure that they were reliable. And those Iraqis, those brave Iraqis who said, "Hey, I'm tired of this type of environment here. I don't want to live like this. I want to be able to have and enjoy, freedoms without having to go to the ice cream parlor and having that blow up, which happened, around our time there." It was just such a dangerous environment. I mean, you hear about gangs running through, and Jaish al-Mahdi is just one of those big groups that you had to pay just so they wouldn't kill you. I mean, so they would go around almost like the tax collector and say, "Hey, what are you giving us this week? And if you don't, you're going to be out here pretty soon." And I think those people who said enough is enough, and they wanted to work with us. Obviously, we had our vetting process that you have to go through and just make sure that we can rely and trust you, and that we're not being deceived by somebody who, like you mentioned earlier, is trying to destabilize or undermine the efforts going on there. But so many people there that were, critical to getting the information so that we could direct the right places there. We had that one place in Baghdad, Karada, which used to be like the fashion district, the high market district. That's where my team was working on a lot of that. And that was General Petraeus. That was one of his main efforts in all of Baghdad. Let's clear up this area. Let's get this done. And we were fortunate enough to work with somebody who had really good insight into the activities. And he would bring us something one day. It would go right out to the maneuver unit. That unit would then take action or something. And over time, that became like that was a freedom and maneuver area. People could go to the market unimpeded and not have to worry about a bomb or anything like that. And I think that was just such a when you think about war, it's not always about like obviously fighting the bad guys and stuff. It's about creating the conditions that your nation can grow again and your economy can grow back and do that, and having that like lifeblood come back through and having the economy start up again without fear of an attack was just such a huge that's the strategic level of war, right? I mean, that's what you have to get done. So
Well, I just remember, Dave, you guys did a great job in Karada, because I remember after maybe you saw this, but there was a priest that used to go out and take destitute Christians food and clothing out of the green zone. And I remember looking at Stars and Stripes one day. I knew that we had been successful in some of the work that your team and my team had been doing, when I saw Muslims raising a cross back up on the church in Karada that had been taken down because they were worried AQI and all these Islamists would attack and kill any of the Christians who would go to the church. But the first service that he did was all Muslims in this service. So it's like, just show you that kind of an example of how Baghdad probably used to be before the war. So that was good work for sure.
yeah, and I apologize if you can hear my dogs barking in the background. It's
I can't hear
walking across the street here, but that's I guess the life of thing. But that's exactly right. I think that's such a cool to see those type of things happen. And look, I know Iraq has had a long history, but like I feel good, looking back at it, 20 years later or 15, 20 years later, and like, yeah, like I think that was worth it, right, for us. And I know, look, getting into that war may have been like, you can go back and say, why did we do it and all this, and whether that was right or I don't really care. We were there. We lived to fight for one another. We wanted to fight for our brothers and sisters, and we wanted to fight for the people of Iraq. And you can't take that away from me. I don't care why we got into it in the first place. That's not my business. But again, I can look back at it and say I'm proud of the work we did there, and look at Iraq today. And look, no country's perfect. No country's going to be perfect. But I was pretty proud of that work.
Yeah, I think it was. I agree. When I came back, all I could tell people was the good things that I saw in
Yeah.
Iraq. I saw it in the bad times, and I saw it when it became the good times. And And you're right. You raised it earlier. That lack of bureaucracy within the SCID, the Strategic Counterintelligence Directorate, which was just literally like information coming in and being pushed out to the people who can, who can work the issue. And I just think that was phenomenal, because my wife, who was with the SCID, they changed it to Joint Counterintelligence something, but it just didn't work well afterwards, because now you had other organizations, three-letter organizations, that were getting involved, that were kind of intrusive when we were there, and we would fight against them. But at the end of the day, we would win that, because we were still Operation Iraqi Freedom. We were able to work through that. The thing that I remember was when she came, she says, what the problem was, we had this other three-letter agency that was literally, we have success with one asset, he'd be taken up by them. And although we had that a few times, but nothing like they did.
Yeah, and again, that's I hate this. I hate to say that we were like the reason for so many of those things, but I think like a lot of the reason for our success showed people what that type of work could be capable of. And again, I didn't mean that the other groups before us didn't have success. Everybody had success, but I think we were able to really show the capabilities of what a really joint organization, a strategic organization focused on the right things could accomplish there. And then, yeah, unfortunately, then the bureaucracy starts coming in, and then you start getting the people like, hey, I want to take credit for that work, and I want to do this. And you do, unfortunately, you lose out on some of that stuff for sure.
100%. Let's talk a little bit about the structure of the SCID, because if you Google SCID, if you Google Strategic Counterintelligence, about the only thing you get is Stephen O'Hearn's book, Intelligence Wars. You don't really see too much more. There's some IG reports in there and just little snippets about the SCID. But maybe that was the success of the organization. We were able to work behind the scenes so successfully that nobody noticed us. And it just kind of worked in as kind of this apparatus. So I think it's just really cool that, the structure of the SCID, how it was set up, as a DoD organization. We had NSA assets. We had all kinds of assets there that were assisting and kind of helping us do our job. And I think that was the team effort, not only between the two teams, but also with the analysts that were there, who could just, when our agents came in with all the intelligence, they regurgitate what the assets said, and the analysts kind of literally in real time are going, okay, here's the targets. Boom, 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 boom. That was amazing to me.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to call out there, Lee, because I think, and I don't know how it was for you and your field offices back in stateside and stuff, but for us, we were just starting to scratch the surface on having direct support analysts as part of our operational work. And to have that all on the same floor, they were just one door down, or in some cases we had some assigned directly to our teams, and then you had the larger cell, like the fusion cell there, that really looked across all of it. But to be able to just go and grab them, and again, you weren't worried about end of day stuff or going home to see your family. All you had to do was work, and so you'd wake up in the morning, go to the chow hall, go get into your room and start going at it, and end of the day you still came back and did it. On the weekends there wasn't much of a weekend, so you just still did it. You still needed to decompress, but we had those analysts there that were able to just give you that immediate validation. Hey, what this person is talking about is this, and help you build your questioning and help you build your meeting agenda for next time, which again, back stateside was a little bit harder to do. You had to rely on other people to do things. There is just, it was all there available for you. It was great to see. So
it was incredible. I mean, that was the thing, that my first tour there as one of the agents working, I remember I would go out, meet with my asset, come in, and literally sit down with the analyst, and we would have this just long meeting. And as I'm watching the stuff, they're literally, consuming it and acting on it immediately. It was just an amazing time. So,
yeah, and I think those were DoD contractors. Again, speaking to the whole jointness of it, we had everything there. What was just so crazy to me is there were a lot of people who wanted to help us, and somehow we had, it was all it was CIFA at the time, the Counterintelligence Field
Yep.
Activity, but then it changed. I think then it became DC. I can't even remember. They changed so many 3 or 4 letter acronyms over the time, but
Yep.
ultimately, they were like itching to help. In 2007, 2006, that's still an early time in that war,
Yeah.
and so like there was so much good work, so many great people along the way that just really appreciated it all.
Yeah, it was really cool. And we can't not talk about the interpreters, man. The interpreters
Oh
really
yeah.
our interpreters were just amazing. Our guys like Mark, and I can't remember all of them, but
Yeah.
we had some
Mark was
good
great.
interpreters. Mark was one of the best, and loved working with him. And he may have saved my life once, and that's we're sitting in a guy's office at the Ministry of Interior, and there was a thing about Pepsi Free being poisoned. They were giving it to American troops, and he tried to serve me Pepsi Free, and Mark looks at it and goes, "No, no, no, no." It looks over at me and goes, just kind of waves his finger, and I look down and goes, "Oh, it's Pepsi Free." So I don't know, maybe I was get
Yeah.
by my Iraqi guy, but Mark is always will have special memories about Mark.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, great point there because yeah, Mark was great. He worked with a lot of my team. He worked with me on one, and I to that point is like I mean, look, we went to like you mentioned earlier in the pod. You said we worked in the green zone, but we really operated in the red. We
Yeah.
would go into the red zone, and that was no small task. Not many of our guys wanted to do that,
Yeah.
and to be able to go into places where you're outnumbered. Like
Yeah.
we're going into places where if they didn't like us, like it's 2 against 30, and we're not going to stand a chance there.
Yeah.
And we would go in, and our interpreter would be side by side with us. So and they're wearing what, a Kevlar and maybe a really thin flak jacket. Like they didn't have one weapon on them. But I mean, I remember going into a place and we would disarm, like in order to show that we trusted them and we wanted to be good partners, I took off all my gear. I took off my body armor, took off my helmet. I went in just with a sidearm. I didn't have my long barrel with me or anything. I went in with just a sidearm, and you're walking down these hallways and you're like, holy hell, this is gonna like, this could go
Yeah.
bad really quickly. And look, to credit to those great Iraqis, they were committed also to building their country. And but Mark being there with me, I'm like, holy hell, so it's great.
He was something else, man. It was one of the bravest dudes I've ever met in my life. I mean, you're right. He's like, he never worried about where we were going. But we had the National Guard units that would protect us on our ventures into the red zone. But it was, the fact that Mark never thought twice. He never had to worry about him not being available. He was ready to go. Or you get like a call from Mark, "Hey, so and so's calling me. He needs to meet with us right now." I mean, that guy had just amazing contacts.
Yeah.
What a guy. I mean, that was part of the success of that structure. Once again, that lack of bureaucracy, people all kind of pointed in the right direction to make sure that we're getting the things that are going to save the lives of our soldiers and our service members there, in Iraq. And that was the coolest thing that I've ever been a part of. That was for sure.
Yeah, it was definitely definitely the best thing that I've been a part of too. And not to say my other work wasn't fun too, and what I'm doing today isn't great fun too. But it's funny you mentioned there's just one book written about it, and O'Hearn. I remember when he wrote that, and it was before I had gone over there, and there was a lot of like debate about this or that. Why would he even write this book? And what, questionable
What was the
stuff that was in
reason?
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so I've often thought, I was like, man, if we could write a book about our time there, I mean, you would. I mean, I wish I could do it. If somebody's out there that's an author and wants to think about writing a book about Iraq, I mean,
Yeah.
please let Lee and I know, and we have pages of notes. So,
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe John Dixon may write something someday because he's the most intelligent guy, one of the most intelligent guys I've ever met.
yeah, for sure.
And I'd love to see something from him because he'd have a perspective that would just be brilliant. But
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. If there's the work that I hate to brag, but
Yeah.
I think we were there at the right time and right place, and the right things were happening. And it was just, I'm still blown away by the stuff that your team, my team, you know, were successful on. And the big thing is the amount, I really believe, of lives that we saved on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And that was, to me, was the most satisfying aspect of all of that time that I was there. Because you guys were doing the 9-month tours, we were doing 3-4-month tours, and I did a 5-month tour that time, and I would have done 6 or 7 months because of, I would stay there as long as Mr. Dixon did, and the rest of the team, John Wagner and of course Tom. But it was just a great experience. Hey, can I ask you about one thing about your career? So I didn't
Yeah.
ask this because I love talking about people's career and how they got to where why the Army? Why? So how did you receive your commission in the Army, and how did that work for you?
Yeah, it's a great story. I mean, I honestly, it's what I always wanted to do. And
Uh-huh.
so like when I was growing up, there was a lot of different things. I grew up watching my dad. I was watching Green Berets growing
Yeah.
up. I was watching all the John Wayne movies growing up. I was watching all, like the Vietnam War movies growing up.
Mhm.
I always felt like there was no greater calling than to serve your country. And again, I'm not disparaging anybody who doesn't feel that way. I'm just saying for me, like it was really important for me to give back to my country. My dad was in the Army. My grandfather and my great uncle served during World War II. They never saw any combat in World War II, but there was a family commitment. And my other great uncle was in the Pacific, and he did Guadalcanal, and he saw a lot of contact with the Marines. But it was always in my family. My dad was in the Army. He transitioned and worked for one of those three-letter agencies in the government for his career. And so for me, it just was natural for me. I wanted to do it. None of my brothers did. None of them had a desire to do it. But for me, I really wanted to do it. So when I went into college, I wanted to go somewhere that had ROTC,
Mhm.
and I wanted to do that. That's what my dad did. So I went to Gettysburg College my freshman year. They didn't have it there. So I didn't like the school either. That's another podcast story for another day. But I
Small school,
ultimately,
pretty small school, right?
yeah, it is a really small school, beautiful campus, great
Yeah.
school. But you have one bad mistake on a weekend, and next year you're living that for the next 4 years. So anyway, but ultimately they didn't have ROTC, and so I transferred to George Mason University, which was my hometown in Northern Virginia, and they had ROTC, and I joined immediately. I loved it, and I got my commission right out of that, and there's just always something in there, service my country. And look, I tell people this a lot too, is I I love to fight. I want to fight. I want to fight for what my beliefs are, what I believe the country stands for, and all those things. And so it was just a natural fit for us. And so wanted to go into the intelligence career. Ultimately, I thought the Army was only going to be like a 4 or 5 year stint, and then I was going to follow like my dad did. And I applied to the FBI. What would want to go do that? And so what happened was my first assignment was with the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment, which was based in Fort Carson. There was the cavalry, going back to John Wayne and all those
Yeah.
great movies,
Yeah.
but I loved doing parts of that. And I was getting ready to leave. I was going to transition out, and I had applied to the FBI. I was getting ready to take the FBI test. And then 9/11 happened. And so at 9/11 happened, and I was like, forget it. Like I'm not, this is what I need to do. This is what I want to do. And so my first deployment was to Qatar. So I spent 6 months in Qatar, and right about end of 2002, 2003. I guess it was October 2002 to like May of 2003. And I was standing up, like Qatar was the base for where, the Iraq operations were run out of. And so I went into that, and I had a good time, but I felt like I was missing the fight. I wasn't involved, and yes, it counts as a deployment and all this other stuff, but I really wasn't involved. And so when I went back to the States, I moved up to Fort Meade. and we were involved in the rotations from the very beginning with the SCID.
Mhm.
And the way it worked is you would go and it was kind of like you had one officer in charge and you had like 10 civilians or other members along with you. And I just wasn't in line until 2007, and then my number came up, and I was itching to go, and I was raring to go, and really enjoyed doing that. But that was really, I mean, I always wanted to serve. I'm so proud of my service, and my son now is, he's a first lieutenant in the Army
Oh,
now,
nice.
out at Fort. Actually, it's Joint Base McChord out there in Seattle or
Okay.
Tacoma, I guess. But again, he's carrying on the powder tradition of service to your country. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Is he going military intelligence, or is he, what's he choosing to do?
so he started as an armor officer, and
Okay.
then so he's doing this. He's in a scout platoon now, and then he is transitioning. So the Army has a way you can go and serve in a combat unit
Mhm.
early, and then transition when you become a captain to intelligence, because intelligence doesn't need a lot of officers at a low level. They need them at the higher levels.
Sure.
And so they do a reverse thing they call it branch detail. But so he's an armor officer now.
Mhm.
In about a year and a half, he'll switch over to the MI Corps and carry on over there. So he's excited about it. He's enjoying his time being out in the field
Yeah.
with the armor guys, but he's ready to transition as well too. So
And that's awesome. So yeah, that's really cool, man. So when he goes into MI, is he where would he be posted then?
it just depends on what he wants to do. So he could go as like a tactical guy and then just to go out to one of the armor, like go back to an armor unit as serve as their intelligence officer,
Mhm.
or he could go at a strategic level and maybe get assigned to NSA or one of the supporting one of those groups out in the DC area. So there's a lot of opportunity for MI guys. And I think the important part though, like MI, you always the rub about MI guys is they're geeks, right? You have the paper, the tape around your glasses, you have the pocket protector and all that other stuff.
That's
And
not right.
yeah, it's not right, but there's a lot of it that's true. But the rub about them was that is that that's what people are. So they, having that tactical experience, knowing what you're, because as an MI guy, you have to develop intelligence about the enemy to
Mhm.
support those tactical units.
Sure.
And if you don't know how they fight, and if you don't know how they live and they operate, how are you expected to support those guys? And
Sure.
so I was an MI guy through and through all the way, and I then became more into counterintelligence. But
Mhm.
when I went to the Third Armored Cav, I went to Scout. I was one of the first MI guys to go through and graduate from the Armor School's Scout Platoon Leader course. Again, those are only for armor and infantry guys to learn how to be a Scout Platoon Leader, and they sent me as an MI guy. And I think I was the fourth one to go through and graduate that course as an MI guy.
Yeah.
And you just have to know how they fight. You have to know how they sleep. You have to know the fear that they have, knowing what's around the corner. And if you can't articulate why your information that you're developing is so important to them, then you need to get out. And so that's what I've really tried to impress upon him is that, learn as your tactical time what's important so that when you're an intel guy, you can deliver what those guys need.
That's awesome. I think you're selling yourself short too, because when I think of Army MI, I think of Lieutenant Nix or Captain Nixon and Band of Brothers
Oh, that's right.
crawling out of that foxhole in the middle of in the siege of Bastogne, and that's what you need to portray MI as, not the guy with the glasses and the
Yeah,
paper.
there you go. There you go.
Yeah,
Yeah, I have a bottle of whiskey around here too that I'll pull out that's another mixing kind of thing, wasn't it? He always found the good wine, didn't he? So
That's good. Oh yeah, especially when he walked to that big warehouse at the end. Oh my goodness. So let's go back to our time in Iraq. Just kind of the day-to-day living is so people can understand what it was like for us at the SCID. So we were at Fob Union 3, which was right next to the courthouse where Saddam Hussein was being tried.
Yep.
Remember the U.S. Marshals, bringing him coming back and forth to court. And did you go on the tour of the courthouse at that time with all of us?
I did. I did. That was a really fascinating view. I mean, that was really cool.
That was cool. It's like, wow, how did they build? It was a nice courtroom. I remember they wouldn't allow us to sit in Saddam Hussein's chair. You remember that?
Yep. Yep.
I don't know, what's the big deal, it was a really interesting time to be there with Saddam Hussein going through his trial. But
yeah, I mean, it was like you speak about that, and wasn't the building that also next to it where a J dam blew out the middle of the
yes,
building too? Like, because I think couldn't we go up to the roof and look down through the hole and you'd see
good.
some? It was just crazy what we were living in. I mean, these were buildings that, like the way they built buildings in Iraq too, like just effectively just cement, like just those cement blocks. That's all it was over and over. And they put the plaster out there, but yeah, it was weird. It's like living in some of those bombed out some of those buildings. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, I remember there was another 3-letter agency right next door to us that we'd all used to have confrontations with now and again. But they had like their offices, I think they kind of bordered with that JDAM hole.
Yep.
Because it was like you could literally look down as you walk through, because the Australians were on the other side.
That's right. The Australians were there too. Yeah.
And so we had the Australians, we had the other agency, us, and those guys, man, carrying their weapons around like quick draw McGraw holsters down here. I was like, what in the hell?
I love the Australians. Do you remember like we used to play pickup volleyball with those guys?
Oh yeah, sure.
That was fun, but those Australians are pretty good at volleyball, so you don't want to mess around there, right?
Yeah, they've been playing on the beach for a while, I'm sure. Yeah,
that's right.
And then we used to have those basketball games or football games or right outside on the like the gravel. There's no grass anywhere.
There's no grass. It was just all gravel.
Throwing the ball around. And I remember, just some of the memories of parking there at Josiah. It looked like a tree with water buffaloes underneath. All of our G cars, parked underneath the tree to keep them cool as we could when those 124-degree days. It was something else.
I remember I have a belt that I had a belt that I took there, and I still have it today. I mean, I have it today still. I still wear it. It was a leather belt. I remember it was so freaking hot there, and we would do training. Remember, was it Sundays that we would do training?
Yeah, we did Sunday did training. Yeah.
Yeah, we'd go to a place, the cross swords or something, do some training drills, make sure that we worked on our, movement to contact or other type of drills or respond to contact. Yeah, and like you're wearing all your body armor, and that stuff is heavy, and it's 120, 30 degrees out there. Like I'm sweating down my ass crack, and I got on my belt still is this. I swear it's like the proverbial sweat stain now, like on my backside. And I'm like, all right, there we go. So
this is the shit, man.
That's
here we go. Oh yeah, those training sessions were always fun, because we were, it was always fun training with the National Guard. Depending on who was there. Who was there at the time we were there? Was it Massachusetts or was it Texas?
So I think I started, it was Massachusetts, I think, and then I think did it go to Minnesota or maybe it was Texas? Maybe it was Texas. I spent most of my time
there my first time, but I do believe Massachusetts, and maybe you're right. Maybe it was Minnesota that was there afterwards. I can't remember, but I knew Texas came in there at some point.
Yeah, I remember like most of my time was with the Massachusetts guys, and it was just a really, again, you talk about like we've talked about the analysts, we've talked about the interpreters. We had National Guard troops that were fucking awesome.
Yeah,
they were great group of guys there that knew their stuff. They didn't take chances. They were our protected team. So whenever we would go somewhere, we had usually 2 or 3 vehicle convoys with us.
Yep.
And we were in the middle. Typically the agents were always in the middle, but those guys, they knew their stuff. I remember the first time going into the red, and like we had to take a detour. It was something, and I'm there, like I'm like, holy hell, this is not good. Why are we off our main route? What? And they're like, nope, no big deal. and they took us through like heavy traffic. They took us through some pretty crappy neighborhoods and got there. And those guys were calm the whole time. They just had it down. They were confident in their skills. I really enjoyed working with those guys. I know National Guard sometimes gets a bad rap as like weekend warriors. Hey, go spend a week with those guys in Iraq or Afghanistan or any of those deployments. Those guys are deadly serious, and
Oh,
they
I
did a
agree.
great job.
Well, the first tour I there was with Oklahoma National Guard, and
Oh yeah,
they had survived an attack. They lost one soldier, we lost an OSI agent, and one other OSI agent lost her eye in an attack the February before we all got there. And when I got there, it picked us up, for our ride on the Route Irish, and I'll never forget because my first time in Iraq, they said, okay, so here we are, and it was this sergeant, and he was salty. He was probably a Desert Storm veteran. This is just he's back, but a consummate professional because of what they had gone through. He goes, all right, gentlemen, we're going to go down Route Irish, which is typically the most dangerous road in the world. This is how it's going to go, So they'd stuff the agents in that middle car, thing, and we started rolling, and counter flow and flow, all the stuff that we'd had to go through. It could be quite scary sometimes. I mean, John Wagner went down to Basra, got into a rollover accident. The unit down there, they flipped, and he literally just like with that armored vehicle, it was just like literally just kind of like an amusement ride. It's just kind of rolled over. But I saw him a couple of months ago in California, and he's doing great, but I think he still has a few issues with his back because of that.
yeah. I love John. John's one of the great. I mean, does he still this like the ponytail?
Well, he doesn't have that much hair anymore, but he's still a good looking guy. He's working for one of the contractors and making the big bucks, and
Yeah.
enjoying life, living on the California coast and in Orange County. Life is good.
John always cracked me up because he called like one, he had the ponytail, which is
Yeah,
great,
yeah.
and but two, he called me Seafoam all the time because I had a Seafoam. I had a okay, look, it was green when I bought it.
Yeah.
And I don't know the shades or anything, but John knew, man. He's like, that's Seafoam. So he gave me the nickname Seafoam,
He's a worldly man.
yeah, exactly. I had to throw that shirt away as soon as I got home. I was like, I needed it while I was over there, but as soon as it came home, that went away. And I love I will never forget John Wagner, mostly because of the Seafoam. But
Yeah,
again, part of that great leadership team.
yeah,
Tom Cox doing the officer drill,
yeah.
John being the deputy, and then John Wagner. I'm sorry, John Dixon
Yeah.
being the director there. Just such a refreshing thing. I also had Adam Dottle, who was another guy from the Army. He was there before John Dixon, or I'm sorry, John Wagner came in, and Adam Dottle wound up. We worked closely together after Iraq as well. Another great guy, but I didn't know him before I got there, and he was an Army guy. I didn't know him. It's just a great time when you can pull all these people together and you build these amazing environments. And yeah, you said it earlier, right time, right place, right people,
Mhm.
and we got the stuff done.
Yeah,
That's
sure.
it.
Well, so when you left, you were awarded the Bronze Star, which you well deserved because your team did outstanding stuff, and you spent time in the red zone, and you were out there. A lot of people, if your family knew some of the stuff that you and maybe and I as well went through there, it's like in how we kind of operated kind of behind the closed doors and out on the routes. They would be like, don't ever you get one of those speeches of, I don't know what's wrong with you, but you're never doing that stuff again. But it was really fun. But now, who was your follow on after? Because I remember her; she was actually really good too, as well.
Yeah, Heather Keithley.
Heather Keithley, that's right.
She followed me, and Heather and I worked very close together. Before in our outside of Iraq back at Fort Meade. She was a great agent as well. Really smart on top of things, and also like Joe Sheridan. I think he came and worked with you as your team.
Mhm.
Joe's retiring this year. He's a full
That
bird
right?
colonel. he is like, talk about a guy who is just like one of the greatest people I've met and
Yeah.
known. But Joe Scherer is another great one of those officers who really just like set the example so high, always was a consummate professional. But yeah, Heather replaced me, and on that side too, just another great agent.
Yeah.
So
Well, Heather was great to work with too. I mean, it's like it was such a pleasure to work with both of you guys. And I, it's like Joe Sheridan, one of the most competent guys I've ever. Once again, Kirk Zemple or Joe Sheridan, Lisa Bowden. I mean,
yeah.
they were all excellent operators, and what a blessing to have those people come at the time. Because I used to say, it was like I was on autopilot, man. All I had to do is just let them operate, and try to keep people out of their business. And that was kind of the job. And boy, I'm glad that Joe has stayed in the Army and is retired now as a colonel. He is, I can see that. Well, he comes from greatness, Phil Sheridan, I used to have that
Yeah.
conversation with his, why you put my boys down in Virginia? Why are you burning the farms?
He's got a long, talk about long family histories,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. For
Yeah.
sure.
He was something. He was a great guy, super, super good guy. Well, I tell you, you know, is there any other memories that you can think about that we during our time there, rather than the translucent cauliflower that we used to eat every night at the chow?
I
Lots of steak night for sure. It was good.
Yeah, I think really the people, like that's the
Yeah.
big thing for me. Look, we did a lot of great operations, we did a lot of great success, and I think there was so much to that. But like the people there is what I remember. You talked about a lot of the great Army guys. For me, it was like on my side, it was Tim Bonadies from the Air Force. It
Mhm.
was Jay Farquharson from Navy. It was Knox also from Navy. John Nacella. I
Yeah.
mean, these guys it wasn't just about we knew how to get the work done,
Mhm.
but we brought a life to that. Like we were a family, and
Yeah.
we were always just looking out for one another. We didn't always agree, we didn't always like each other, but and I had also Tahir Manisterly and Sean Michaud, Chris Adams. Like there's so many great people there that work together to get this stuff done. And then we also cut loose at times. There's a lot of crude jokes. There's a lot of really bad,
Yeah.
like bad jokes. There's a lot of awful movies we watched, and it was just so like in the fact that
Yeah.
any day you could be facing the end,
Yeah.
right? It was just because there was that pucker factor. You always had that concern when you ever went into the red zone.
Mhm.
Even when you're in the green zone, when you got mortared all the time, right? I
Yeah.
mean, so it wasn't like that's a safe area either. But I think beyond that, it was the people there that really I took with me, and I'm so glad we stayed in touch, and all this other stuff. It's so great to be able to see you, Lee, and just know that you guys are an imprint in my life, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Same here, brother.
yeah,
Same here. It was what an amazing experience. I think that's all that can be said about it. Was really the people were the success of that mission,
yeah,
um, that made it work. And so blessed to have those people in our lives. And I'm so glad to see so many of them go on to do bigger and better things in their careers. So it's good. It was a
yeah,
good experience for sure.
yeah, definitely for sure. So,
Well, listen, I want to talk to you a little bit about what you're doing now, because I think it's
yeah,
really important to hear what you're doing. I think it's an emerging industry, as I said before in our pre-interview, as head of insider threat for Wells Fargo Bank. Tell me a little bit about that and what a day in the life of Dave Pounder at Wells Fargo does.
yeah, it's I appreciate that because look, I mean, counterintelligence that doesn't really resonate in the corporate world, and even when I was leaving the army, the word counterintelligence was getting merged with this word insider threat,
Yeah,
and to me, insider threat was always about counterintelligence. That's what we did. Like you are counterintelligence. We did annual briefings to all of our employees to talk about the counterintelligence risks. Don't like obviously you don't want to commit espionage against the United States. You don't want to be a target of somebody from a foreign country. but you also don't want to be a risk to your business because you don't adhere to security practices, you don't adhere to the rules and policies, and you're just sloppy. And those are insider threats. But the world had, like, corporate side had not really caught on to that. So when I left, I thought I was going to go to these corporations like, look at my resume, look how the cool stuff I did, and they're going to just scoop me up. And the reality was, it was a hard road. I mean, I went in and I was like, oh, this is going to be tough. And so, but thankfully, like, information security kind of merges with a little of that work. And so I started working at Citibank, first as a contractor and then as a full-time Citibank employee within information security. And I started just understanding the business, right? How does Citibank work, and what do they do, and how do they how do they make their money, but also then how do we protect them so that they can keep making their money? Because at the heart of all of what I do is, I want to protect people. I want to protect their investments. I want to protect their, in the Army, it was protecting soldiers, protecting civilians, or protecting all that stuff. Here it's I'm protecting people who are investing with our company, protect their data, protect their investments, protect their information. And so it was just really good. I spent about 3 or 4 years just navigating that information security world. And then a guy I knew in the Army, Brooke Seitz, who is now on to great things at a couple other financial institutions, came to me and said, "Hey, Dave, are you interested in helping with this insider threat program that we're building within Citibank?" And I said, "Oh, hell yeah, let me do that." And so I joined up with Brooke, and for about 18 months, we started building this insider threat program at Citibank. It was just me and Brooke. Brooke was managing a couple of different things. So, but he was like I'd call him like a half of a 1.5 Dave and Brooke of trying to push this ball up this hill. And it was a great opportunity for me to start applying what I knew in the Army to the corporate side. And we did a lot of great things, and not surprisingly, some of the same threats you have in the military and the government, you have in corporate work, or the corporate world too. And so it's educating your workforce to try to understand and report those concerns to the right people. And that was going great. And I love my time at Citibank. I love the people I was working with there. And then, Brooke reached out to me and said, "Hey, dude, I think you need to look at this opportunity here at Wells Fargo. And let me put you in contact with somebody." And so I was like, "Oh, that's way out of my league. I want to get there eventually, but I'm not ready for that now. And oh, by the way, I just took this new role at Citibank. I'm not so sure that's the right thing." And he's like, "Dude, you won't regret it." And I said, "All right, sure." So I talked with my wife. We're very happy in Florida. Everything was going fine. But I was like, "Hey, let me throw my hat in the ring. This is where I want to be eventually. And so let's see if we're ready for it now."
Mm-hmm.
And I was so thankful that Wells Fargo took a chance with me, and they said, "Dave, we want you to come up here and lead this program and build it out the way you want to build it." And in a lot of respects, look, we're going to give you the framework, but we want you to build this. We're going to put our trust in you. We're going to give you the resources. And to me, I was blown away by that. That was really what the at the end of the day, again, whatever they pay differences, it doesn't matter. Like, I wanted to be in a place where I knew I was going to be supported and I knew I was going to be resourced. And Wells Fargo was that from the very beginning. And so I went there in October of 2021, and pretty much I've been enjoying it ever since. There's a lot of hard days building an insider threat program, but this is where corporations are going now. And they recognize that employees present a really high level of risk. And it's not always for malicious reasons, it's just for day to day. And it's like I equate it a lot to death by 1,000 paper cuts, right?
Yeah, sure.
It's a lost email here, or it's a web upload there, or it's downloading software here. Those all things may not in and of themselves be all too important, but when you do it repeatedly over time, one, you have a bad culture, and two, you're like you're leaking like a sieve. And so one of the big focuses my team has been doing has been trying to close those and educate the workforce, because education is so important to create a new culture. And frankly, the leadership at Wells Fargo has been phenomenal. They have really been changed. Look, we all know what happened in 2016 and those years with that is dead. That is old. We still deal with the ramifications of that. But the bottom line is the culture at Wells Fargo is changing so much for the better. And it's like my team is contributing to that. And I feel really good about that. And it's been 2.5 years, and we're finally at a place where I think that we're like really in that we're part of the environment. We're part of the infrastructure now, where we no longer have to go to people to tell us, hey, we're the insider threat program, we need you to do this. They're coming to us and saying, hey, Dave, we have a potential insider threat risk here, we'd like your assistance to help us close that. Right. And that mindset change is so different, and it's so great to see. But day to day, it's a lot of that stuff is, hey, we've got a new crisis of the day. Is this, and we have to assess, is this a one-off event, or is this something big, or is this something like a thematic issue we got to do? And the great thing is I'm supported by great leaders. My boss today is an amazing leader, and she gives me a lot of opportunity with the right guide rails. And then my two-up boss from that, another great guy who's no nonsense, he's old school, and he really gets after it, and he holds people accountable. And I tell you, that's what organizations need, is when you can hold people accountable, it just gets really good space. So I probably talked a little longer than you wanted to, but well, I thoroughly enjoy it.
Well, I got to say that, the fact that they gave you a structure and allowed you to build it, build within it, you kind of give you the guidelines. Okay, this is what we want. And you were able to build it. That shows they have a lot of trust in you, and they got the right guy doing it. So that's good stuff.
I hope so.
Well, the fact you've been there for a few years now, I think it's going the right direction. So you just keep up the work you're doing. Because I know insider threat, I mean, we talk about it all the time, even in the department. I just retired for the last time with NCIS, my third annuitant gig training. And I said, the agency is so much better today than what it was when I joined. And it's because we have a good insider threat program. And when I see what we're doing with insider threat with the Department of Navy and the Marine Corps, it's just fascinating to see, from the cyber aspect of it to the human aspect of it, how, like you said in the past, it's just sloppy work sometimes.
Yeah,
it's just sloppiness, and you got to keep them tuned up. I used to hate those counterintelligence briefings. You had the training in every year, and you got to pick the button. You got the phone. What's the threat here? But it just lays down that aspect of how important those small things that we sometimes overlook can be. How important it can be especially to a company like Wells Fargo. I'm sure to protect those assets.
Yeah, I mean, it really is, and we try to we want to make we know. Look, I mean, education, and nobody wants another email to have to do another piece of training and all this other stuff. But man, it does have an impact. So it's finding that right. How are you going to connect? And not one size doesn't fit all. I like, to your point about the briefings. Like, we used to go to an auditorium, and this. God, for this E4, E5 would get up, and it'd be the death by PowerPoint. And hey, if Ivan approaches you in a bar, are you gonna know it? And like, I get it. We got to do that. Like, but we've got to make training engaging. We've got to make it in a way that is gonna resonate with that person long after the meeting. And so those E4s, E5s, I hated it for them because they had a tough audience, but I'll tell you, it's such a critical. It's one of my core pillars. Training and education is such I call it education awareness or whatever. But it's so important to getting your message across and building that lasting culture about doing what is right. So
very much so. Well, Dave, man, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. Lots of good memories from their time at the Strategic Counterintelligence Director, as we call it, the SCID. It was amazing to work with you then. I'm glad you're successful now and things are going well. I hope we can keep in touch and talk about maybe do another podcast on another aspect. someday soon.
Yeah, I love it. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I can't believe it's been an hour, Lee.
I know,
So,
it's a boom. It goes fast.
it does go by fast, but again, great people. I'm glad we could stay connected like this, Lee, and I'm happy. We got a lot of other stories to share too, with Jeff Walton, a guy I connected with
Yes.
after his time. I know you know him well and stuff.
Yep.
So.
Jeff was my boss in Europe. So, and a tough boss. He was a good boss, but he could be tough.
Fair enough. No, I thoroughly enjoyed it, Lee. Thank you very much.
Wow, what a great show today with Dave Pounder. Great asset to the Strategic Counterintelligence Directorate. Wonderful teammate, great guy to work with, and we did some great work together. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's show. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and leave your comments below. I would love to interact with you. Until next time, thanks for watching NCIS Reports from the Field.